story's true. So Tim came to, I was giving a panel about doing a blog to a book. Tim was about to come out for our work week. He sat in the front row, did his Tim Ferriss networking afterward, right after the thing, hey, what's up? We have 3 things in common, and here they are. And we went out for coffee, and I told him everything I knew about book marketing, which wasn't that much, but he took that and added a ton of other things, and then now he's, Tim Ferriss. And then I connected Seth to him. I'm sure you guys read For Our Body. Seth has a big piece in that. And I think it's funny. I think probably in 20 or 30 or 40 years, people will probably forget Seth Roberts. I mean, we won't, but no one's going to forget Tim Ferriss. And Seth, Tim will tell you Seth is one of the people who helped him quite a bit, understand a lot of things that Seth knows. And Seth was an influencer to influencers. And I don't know if our culture is going to have a bigger influencer, at least to a lot of aspects of our culture, than Tim Ferriss for the next 20 years. So, Tim.
Thanks, brother. Thank you, brother. Well, that's a very kind intro. Despite the fact that I have most of my books that sound like infomercial products, and in fact, that's one of the ways that I bonded with Seth, because when you made the intro, Tucker, I remember, I was like, the Shangri-La Diet, really? I thought no book title could possibly sound scammier than the 4-Hour Workweek. And I was wrong. And met Seth and had exactly the same experience, where he was wearing, his Velcro shoes, and I'm like, did they just let this guy out for the day, or is he on work leave absence? What's happening here? And by the end, I realized, I was like, no, he just could not care less about what other people think if they're not qualified to have an informed opinion. And he helped me so tremendously in so many different ways. The 4-Hour Body, I would say largely you could attribute to Seth and his early encouragement. And we met through Tucker, and I recall very vividly the very first Quantified Self meetup. So if you've ever heard of Quantified Self, and they have meetups in, I don't know, probably several dozen countries now, hundreds of cities. Well, we were both at the first ever Quantified Self meetup, and it was in Kevin Kelly's house in Pacifica. Kevin Kelly's the founding editor of Wired magazine. He's done a million other things. And I remember Seth just ruthlessly challenging almost everything that came up at that event, and it made the other people better. It made them refine their positions. It made them step back from the weeds in which they were accustomed to operating to look at things afresh. And that's also the first time that I got up, I was effectively called on by Kevin, and I was not prepared. And so I decided at the time, since I was doing all of these crazy self-experiments with performance-enhancing drugs, to talk about performance-enhancing drugs for like 20 minutes and how athletes win gold medals through better pharmaceutical use. And that really, I think, my willingness to be open about that, which it can become a moral discussion as opposed to a scientific discussion, helped Seth and I bond. And he was always the one encouraging me to be bolder, to step out and be forthcoming with my opinions. And I think especially on the internet, it's a full contact sport. And if you have a strong opinion, even if it's very informed, even if you have the data on your side, you have experience on your side, 10% of the people that come across that message are going to find a way to take it personally, and you're going to get ridiculed, you're going to get put on a spike, you're going to be crucified. And he was always there to remind me to pay attention to the people who get it, not the number of people who don't get it, or who choose not to get it, who are going to stand on the sidelines and ridicule the people who stumble as they're actually trying to create things. And that was part of the reason why I put all the things I did in the 4-Hour Body, including the sex chapters and the 15-minute orgasm chapters, which it turns out, in retrospect, was a genius move because it was right in the middle of the book. So what would happen is when these very conservative mothers would go into Costco in the middle of the US and open the book, it would flip open to vagina diagrams, and that's why it was yanked off all the shelves at Costco. But there are a few principles that I continually came back to with Seth, and we had many meals, spent a lot of time together, and I thought I'd share just a few of those. So the first is that the extremes inform the mean, but not vice versa. What does that mean? Well, if you watch a movie called Objectified, it's a great movie, it's about design, there's an interview with the former head of R&D from Smart Design. They make the OXO handles, and they've done a lot of work in consumer products. And he was asked how they design products. You know, how do you design products for the average, like, 35-year-old housewife in Milwaukee who da-da-da, and he goes, we don't care about averages. We want to design a product that can be used by, say, the paraplegic and then the 350-pound bodybuilder who can't brush his teeth because his arms are too big. Those aren't the examples he used. But when we take care of those edge cases, then we gain more from testing in those areas, and it helps us to fill in everything in between. But it's very hard to start with the middle and address those edge cases, which is why part of the reason why I've spent so much time abusing myself with blood tests every 2 weeks or whatnot, and so on. But what I find is when I test the extremes, I'm able then to cull the data and dial it back so that it can be adopted by a wider audience, or at least tested by a wider audience. So just because I have stem cell growth factors being injected up and down my spine after importing them from Israel doesn't mean that you can't just use prolotherapy, for instance, or myofascial release. The second principle is oftentimes you have to choose between faster results or big data. And of course, there's the question of whether big data is even a good thing or not with certain applications. But given the weaknesses of observational data, if you have, say, chronic back pain, or you have chronic depression, or you have an acute injury, you don't have the luxury of necessarily waiting for a longitudinal study to be conducted over 5, 10, 15 years. And even if it were conducted, would the answers help you? Probably not, in most cases. So Seth, I remember talking to him. Well, the first example, the extremes inform the mean. I remember talking to Seth at one point, and hopefully I'm not stealing anyone's thunder later, but he's like, we're talking about experiments over dinner, and he came to what he was up to. He goes, yeah, I've been standing on one leg a lot. I was like, okay, elaborate. And he goes, well, I found that I sleep much better when I stand on one leg. So he's just been like perching like a crane for hours. And he's like, no, I find that, I think it was like 5 to 7 hours is about right. And I'm like, what? Like, who on earth is going to stand on one leg for 5 to 7 hours? Seth is the answer. Seth would do that. And like, lo and behold, you can get a lot of that benefit just by using a standing desk. You don't have to like Karate Kid it the whole time. But he was always pushing the extremes and the edges, which made for some really fun conversations. And then in terms of fast results, Seth had his challenges with feeling perhaps isolated, as I do still. And we talked about that quite a bit. But he found that faces in the morning put him in a better mood. Faces in the morning. Like, you're going to wait for someone to fund that study? Good luck with that. Unless you belong to a very wealthy family and can write the check yourself. So I think that if I could just make a prescriptive recommendation, always dangerous to do, but if you were going to take one thing away from some of the work that I've done, but also I think what a lot of people do is regularly tracking. So someone was talking about this earlier, but the annual checkup. I mean, it's kind of like getting a high-resolution photograph of a soccer game and then being asked to describe the entire soccer game. You just really can't do it. You're better off getting even lower resolution, meaning lower cost, and doing that, I think, if you can afford it, at the very minimum every 3 months or so. And that allows you to trend. And I think that trending data and catching problems before they become problems is often easier than people would suspect. The next principle is the minimum effective dose. So this would be on one the opposite of doing the Karate Kid to go to sleep, perhaps. But Seth was constantly looking for variations that would work for readers. And his blog was, I remember looking at his blog, and I don't read that many blogs, and I was just amazed by the level of engagement in the comments and how helpful and constructive people were. And I used that as a model for my own blog. But he was able to adjust his recommendations and test them en masse in many different ways, one of which was honey and vinegar before bed. Okay, so especially since I'm like the slow-carb guy and don't like simple sugars, I was like, all right, am I going to choose like body fat, better sleep? Body fat, better sleep. Like, I'm not going to be doing any bodybuilding competitions in a Speedo anytime soon, so I'm going to go for the sleep. So I tried to do this raw honey and then tablespoon or two of apple cider vinegar and hot water, and man, that is like a tranquilizer dart from God. It is amazing. And ended up sharing that then with my audience, and I loved sharing Seth's work to the extent that I could, and literally hundreds of people came back. And is this definitive proof? No, right? But hundreds of people came back and said, I just had the best night of sleep. I've tried Lunesta, I've tried this, I've tried that. Best night of sleep in the last 10 years after using honey and vinegar. So the minimum effective dose. Maybe the solution to what you perceive as a complicated problem is very, very simple and very, very easy. Just because the problem is hard for you doesn't mean the solution has to be hard. And you know, I was going to end in terms of principles with content is king, and just like sticking to your guns. If you have strong opinions that are founded, if you have opposing views that are founded, or even provocative, that can stir the pot and get people to examine a problem in a new way, not to keep it to yourself and to talk about Seth's content. But I realized more than anything else, what I remember of Seth is that he really gave a damn. And I know it sounds perhaps cliched, but when I talked to him, he always wanted to talk about his students in China and his hardworking students and his smartest students, and he really cared. And I think that he showed me, like, you don't have to aim for changing 1 million lives. You don't have to try to approach this mountain of an objective. You don't have to try to boil the ocean at once. If you just focus on, say, the handful of people in your blog comments, and you take the time to care about those people and view them as more as just a screen name or something like that, like, you can really change lives and create domino effects that cause other people to help other people to help other people. And I'm going to miss him. I remember when Ryan sent me the text and mentioned his passing. I was at a restaurant, Central Kitchen in San Francisco, and I was just dull. I didn't feel anything, and it was so weird to me that I didn't feel anything. And I said to Ryan, I was like, I don't feel anything. I suspect that's going to change. And it took a good day and a half for it to hit me because it didn't seem real. And then I was just demolished for the rest of the week and couldn't function very well. So he was a lovely human being. He really cared, and I feel really blessed to have had him in my life. And I think that everyone here probably feels that way. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.